So, as mentioned at the outset, my name is Chris Jeffrey. I'm the editor of Central Banking Publications. Central Banking is a UK producer of high-value information in the form of analysis, interviews, research, seminars, training, books, and so on, which we've been producing for central bankers and other policymakers and interested parties for the past 28 years around the world. We're very honoured to be working with the International Finance Forum to help produce the China report, and indeed to be participating in the seminar here with such distinguished speakers and guests today. I plan to split my comments really into three sections. The first, really very briefly, to explain some of the background about the IFF China report, then to explain a little bit about what's in the current report. Hopefully you've all got copies. And finally, to share some of the results from the inaugural survey of Belton Road country central banks that we did with some interesting results. So central banking has had a relationship with the IFF dating back more than a decade. We share quite a number of common members of our respective central banking's advisory board and the IFF committees. And we really established the IFF China report now in its third edition to help to try and explain some of the more important developments taking place in China's economy and place these changes in the context of their impact on the global economic, financial, monetary system, and to do this in English and to do it to an audience around the world. The 2018 report is being distributed to around 30,000 officials at multilateral institutions, ministries of economic development, finance, central banks, regulators, sovereign wealth funds, financial services institutions, think tanks, and so on. In the current report, we've also sought to provide an opportunity for international experts to offer fresh perspectives on some of the important areas of development for the Chinese and the global economic, monetary, and financial systems. This year's report includes more than 40 contributions from top Chinese officials, such as the heads of the AIIB, the China Development Bank, we're very pleased to have the head here today, Social Security Fund, as well as China experts, as I mentioned, in the international community, some of the former prime ministers, for example, of South Korea, Pakistan, and New Zealand. The report draws a lot on comments made at the IFF's annual meetings in Guangzhou, and of course coincides, as mentioned earlier, with the 40th anniversary of China's economic reform and opening up program. The report kicks off with a foreword written by the former chief economist at the World Bank, Justin Lin, which is entitled China Forecast 2050, Interpreting China's New Development Concept. As Xi Jinping thought is enshrined in China's constitution, Lin describes the far-reaching innovation in all sectors of industry and finance that are needed to attain China's stated goal of national rejuvenation. The report then breaks down into 5 sections. The first one is on China's opening up and reform, and essentially that details the experiences of China's modernization during the past 40 years. That obviously includes the transition from an agricultural economy to a more advanced high-end manufacturing and services plus internal consumption that we've seen in recent years. And we hope that might provide some valuable lessons and insights to other nations that are seeking their own development paths. Section 2 is on the financial crisis, a decade on. Clearly, the global financial crisis prompted a lot of rethinking. The G20 took the initiative to introduce tough new regulations for financial institutions and instruments, but the architecture of the global monetary, economic, and financial system still seems to have many flaws. The report details some of the lessons, perhaps, that China can learn from the global financial crisis, as well as how China may be able to assist in the creation of a more robust system in the years ahead. The third section is looking at the financial system reform. China's focusing a lot of effort, as we've heard recently, on tackling the build-up of risks in the banking and financial system, while also seeking to open up both to external parties, so we heard in most recent speeches, as well as towards obviously market-based mechanisms, and to ensure that credit gets to the areas of the economy, the real economy, where it's really needed. And at the same time, there's been a big embrace of fintech, and policymakers are grappling, as they are elsewhere, on how to make sure they're doing that in a controlled manner in terms of for the best for the people. Then we have, of course, the big one, really, I guess, that everyone's talking about a lot, the Belton Road Initiative. The signature going out initiative now, according to the Chinese government, includes 71 jurisdictions with hundreds of billions of dollars of investment allocated. So leading Chinese and international policymakers explain how some of these BRI efforts are progressing. And as mentioned, this includes a survey, which I'll come on to in a minute, of central banks. But 92% of respondents expect the BRI to lift their GDP in the next 5 years, which I think is quite an interesting finding. The final section, an area maybe people don't know so well, is the Bay Area development. The Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Great Bay Area represents an effort to coordinate and create globally competitive city clusters at the start of basically the 21st century maritime Silk Road in southern China. So that's the start of the Belton Road, effectively. And these efforts are particularly focused on innovation, technology, science, environmental and financial services, including a financial innovation hub in Nansha, where the IFF is building its conference headquarters and other capabilities. So as I mentioned, this year's report does include the first ever IFF survey of Belton Road central banks. It's conducted to mark the 5th anniversary of President Xi Jinping's visionary One Belt, One Road speech. The IFF teamed up with central banking to survey the central banks of jurisdictions participating in BRI to give us their insights. So some of the, just let me draw up some of the key conclusions. Seem to be missing something here. Yeah, so we targeted central banks as they are key advisors to governments on economic and financial matters. They often have technical competency and capacity, particularly in developing markets, and are often charged with a financial stability mandate in addition to their monetary policy goals. And about a quarter of the BRI central banks also have currency swap agreements with the People's Bank of China. We received responses from more than 24 BRI country central banks. Just over half of them were from European region, as we defined it, and the rest from Asia, Middle East, and Oceania. And the results were published on an anonymized basis. So what were some of the key findings? I mentioned one earlier, but also just under half of the central banks described the Belton Road as a once-in-a-generation initiative. Nearly 3/4 of those surveyed said, however, that they didn't think that it had resulted in greater investment from China than was already expected. But as I said, 92% of respondents felt that it would boost their domestic GDP during the next 5 years. Most funding is still expected in major and mega projects, infrastructure projects, with the lion's share of funding still expected from the Chinese development banks, China-led and other multilateral institutions, and financial centers performed rather poorly. Domestic currency with 32% and the euro with 29% of votes were the preferred funding currencies, and perhaps surprisingly, respondents ranked renminbi and US dollar funding at the same level of 19% for their preferred funding. Meanwhile, 63% said that they actively supported or support expanding the capital of the Asian the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the new development bank with SDR currencies, 60% favoured domestic currency expansion. But central banks unanimously rejected the idea of using FX reserves for infrastructure, and they also seem to be against the idea of using sovereign wealth fund money for BRI projects specifically. We touched on standards earlier. There was overwhelming support for sound ethical standards and transparency for BRI projects across all the regions. Meanwhile, in terms of some of the obstacles, legal frameworks, financing and government sector issues were stated as the largest obstacles to development. Policy and political risks were viewed as the two greatest barriers to the BRI. In terms of geopolitics, the BRI is expected to create, from the central bank respondents, the greatest friction with the EU and the US, 42% and 33% respectively, and there appeared to be very little concern about increasing strain in relations with Russia, Japan, and even with India. So that's about all I have time for, but I'd be very happy to discuss the report in more detail, and especially obviously on the survey. I'd be grateful for any feedback that people have. Please feel free to do that so that we can develop things moving forward. And finally, I'd just like to express our gratitude from central banking to the IFF and to the many leading thinkers that participated in publishing this report. And thanks, of course, to all of you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.